Good evening and welcome to Domination Submission Radio. My name is Mike Makai. I'm your host with the most DS, BDSM, kink, and fetish talk on Blog Talk Radio. This is a call-in show, although I don't know if we're going to be able to squeeze you in tonight because we have a lot on our plate. But if you want to call in, the number is 347-857-1862. Again, 347-857-1862. Write that down. You know you're going to call me sooner or later. We also have a chat room, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. If you're listening to us live at Blog Talk Radio, just scroll to the bottom of your screen and you will see a chat room there. I do believe you have to be logged in with Blog Talk Radio to talk in the chat room, but you can also ask your questions, make your comments there, and we'll try and get those on the air for you. I'd also encourage you to check out our website, which is domination-submission.com, where you can also find our links to our social media, things like Twitter, Facebook, and other ways to contact us. I have a really interesting show for you tonight. Our topic tonight is slaves or submissives. What's the difference? Which are you? Which do you prefer if you are a dominant? And does any of this really matter? And we do have a pre-recorded guest, but we're going to have a panel of experts to respond to his comment. Our guest tonight is Master Bobby, and it is Bobby, not Bobby. Master Bobby, who lives in Miami, Florida, has been in the lifestyle as a dominant for about 25 years, and we will be hearing from him throughout the show. I did an interview with him, a pre-recorded interview with him on Tuesday, and what I've done is edited it down to a manageable set of sound bites, which we will play this evening and get the responses or the opinions of our panel of experts. And our panel of experts is pretty freaking awesome tonight. First on our list is L.B. Shaw, who is an author of erotic fiction, about to release her third novel, which is Becoming Stone. She is herself a physical and emotional masochist, relatively new to the lifestyle, considers herself a submissive, and she's in North Carolina. How you doing, LB?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am better than I deserve, I think. So, slaves versus submissives. And you consider yourself a submissive, right?
I think that I'm a submissive. I think I have some other traits, but yes, I don't consider myself a slave, and definitely not a dominant.
Definitely. Okay, our second panel member tonight is Lolita Sin, who likes to be called Lolly. She's in Pennsylvania. She's a professional fetish model and a rope bunny, and she considers herself a slave, don't you, Lolly?
Oh, I did at one point. I don't know about anymore.
Are you evolving here? Are you reconsidering?
Not necessarily reconsidering. I guess just reevaluating how I view the lifestyle, I suppose. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think you're going to see a different side to me tonight.
Interesting. Is that side of you wearing clothes?
Maybe.
And our third panel member this evening is Little Red. Little Red is a personal friend of mine, and she is in the Texoma area, Heartland, who is an enthusiast of impact play and a major masochist. She is a DS sub and a BDSM switch. Do I have that right, Red?
Yeah, that's a pretty apt description, if you could actually pin one on me, but yeah.
Okay. I'm batting 1,000 this evening. All right, so I've got a panel of subbies who are just chomping at the bit to be able to give their opinions of what Master Bobby has to say. And to be fair, I'm just going to let our audience know that each of my panel members this evening has heard Master Bobby's interview, and I guess it would probably be fair to say that you all probably have some issues with some of the things that he has said, and I do too. There's some things that I don't necessarily agree with, but I'm going to put some rules out there just so that everyone understands how this works. The first is the prime directive. Prime directive on this show is be nice, all right? Life is too short to spend it being not nice. So we're going to try and be as nice as we can, even if we disagree with our guest. And the other thing is, because I know that you have heard this interview previously, I want you to try and avoid getting ahead of yourself. So only respond to what we have heard thus far, and kind of avoid the temptation to jump ahead and respond to something that the audience has not heard yet. Are we tracking so far? Everybody good with that?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Right. And because I have all three of you here, which is an odd this is really odd. It's kind of cool, actually, because it's very rare that we have all of you here. I mean, usually we have one or two of you, and you're all here. I'm really happy about that. So, and especially glad to have Lolly back, by the way. Lolly's been gone for several weeks, working out some. We're happy to have you back, Lolly, even if it's only for a short time. I understand you have to go kind of early.
Yeah, just a little bit tonight.
Yeah, well, just let us know when you're about ready to go.
All right.
Now, again, our topic tonight is slave or submissive. I think this is interesting to a lot of people because, well, first of all, I think there's just a whole lot of people, both in and outside the lifestyle, who don't really understand the difference. And I guess there are also a lot of people who understand the difference but don't really understand why it makes any difference. Does that make sense? So we're gonna talk about all of that, and what I'll do is we'll start right out now with Master Bobby's opening moments of our interview that we conducted on Tuesday, and then we'll get your opinions of what he had to say. So let's start this right now. My guest tonight is Master Bobby. You may have seen him in social media, Twitter, Tumblr, FetLife, and he's graciously decided to call in this evening and share some opinions on our topic tonight, which is subs versus slaves. And you're calling in from Florida. Where in Florida, Bobby?
South Florida, Miami area.
Very cool. What's the weather like down there?
Hot.
I'm sure a lot of people are very jealous of you right now. So, you're referred to as Master Bobby in social media. How long have you been in the lifestyle?
Been in the lifestyle for about 25 years, 20 years with my wife.
Mm-hmm. And do you live this 24/7, or is this a part-time thing, or how does that work with you?
We do live it 24/7, but we have children in the house. I have 3 boys, 18, 12, and 9, so it's kind of hard to do things in our house, but we're active, in different groups. We go to different munches, we go to different activities, play parties and things like that. So we do live it 24/7, but it's limited in our actual house.
Sure. Well, that makes perfect sense for most people. Okay, so that kind of sets up the interview. LB, what do you think so far? Did we lose you, LB?
I'm here. I'm sorry, I had muted myself. I was just talking away. It sounds like he's familiar with the lifestyle and has kids, so he doesn't want to complicate things with, or maybe confuse them, or make things difficult for them. But it sounds like he is pretty familiar with the lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. What's your Lolly? What's your definition of a lifestyle? When does it become a lifestyle, or when is it not a lifestyle?
I guess it depends on how much energy it takes from you, whether or not you have to actively decide to do the thing in the lifestyle instead of what you would normally do. It's a way of life. It's how you conduct yourself throughout your life.
Any reaction to what he has to say in the beginning of this interview?
I actually thought this was a fairly impressive introduction for him. He seems to have a lot of experience. So.
Okay, Red, what do you got to say?
The lifestyle for me is, pretty much what Loli said. It's how you conduct yourself and your day-to-day things that might be somewhat different from your next-door neighbors. Maybe not, depending on the community you live in, but so far, like LB said, sounds like he's kind of tracking on what he states his experience is.
Okay, now I'm going to tell you what I think makes it a lifestyle, and I get asked this question a lot. And my answer is, if it impacts significantly every aspect of your life, it's a lifestyle. If it doesn't, then it might be a kink, or it might be a hobby, or it might be a fetish, or whatever you want to call it, an interest, if you want to call it that. And, everyone has to draw that line someplace. I would generally, I would tend to believe that if it's something you can't do at home, I'm not sure it's really a lifestyle, because it's kind of hard to exclude your home life from your life. Does that make sense? So,
yes.
And I understand the challenges of living the lifestyle when you have kids in the house. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you should do that. I'm just saying, it's one of those things that you really have to ask yourself. It's a hard question, and there are no easy answers to it, I think. But
Can I jump in and say something quick?
Go ahead.
He doesn't really specify. He says it's limited in the household, but we don't really know what he means by that. So, you know, it might mean that that they have their own set of rules that they limit, but not, you know, when the kids aren't in the room necessarily, but still live their type of lifestyle, you know, when the kids are in their rooms. I don't know. I mean, that sounds kind of crazy, but we don't really know exactly what he means.
You don't I've actually seen that. You know, a lot of MS couples, when they decide to procreate and raise their children in the same house, they have to tone it down. You know, they can't use "oh master," "oh sir," "oh lord of the house," but there's still kind of a hierarchy, and I think that's a very important distinction. Is do they live their life under the confines of the hierarchy of the domination, or, you know, do they just run rampant once the kids are around?
I just like the fact that you used the word procreation today. Just made my day. I'm such a word whore. All right, here's the next clip. Our topic tonight is subs versus slaves, and not to set this up as a battle of gladiators or anything like that, but in your opinion, what is the difference between a sub and a slave?
To me, the sub is more of I consider it like lust and love. The sub is for the lust, the slave is for the love.
Really? So in your life, then, the differentiation between a submissive and a slave is a matter of the emotional or the relationship dynamic that they have with you. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, what about someone, for example, that you meet in one of your local BDSM munch groups who says, I'm a slave? How does that translate over to your definition? Because your definition is based entirely on the relationship that you have with somebody.
When I'm at a local function and somebody introduces themselves as a slave, I respect them for that. But the problem with terms like that is they're more subjective to an individual than, you know, there's not like a blanket definition for sub, slave, master, dom, things like that. So it's more subjective. But when you meet somebody, you can gauge their character and the type of person they are and what they're looking for in the lifestyle. And you just go off of that. You know, slave, sub, they're all just titles. It's all in how you perceive yourself and how you project yourself into the relationship. Because I've been called master, sir, daddy, dom, you know, of the nice terms. I've been called a lot of other things, but it's more subjective of the activity that you're doing at the time.
I see. All right, you're up to bat first, LB. What do you think?
Well, I am going to disagree that I don't think that, first of all, that sub or slave has anything to do, whether or not you're submissive or a slave has anything to do with love or lust. I'm not sure that whole part just really confused me. So I'm not really sure what he means by that. I think that, you know, whether or not you're emotionally engaged or whatever, I think that you should be emotionally engaged and care about someone if you're a submissive or a slave, either way. And as far as the terms being subjective, I don't think that the terms are subjective. I think rather the nature of the relationship is more subjective, or the structure of the relationship. In other words, there might be some slaves who call themselves a slave but might maintain some liberties, such as, you know, personal finances or deciding what to cook, but still consider them a slave. Tell them they're not a slave and that they're going to disagree. I think that each master-slave relationship looks and acts differently depending on the limits or the demands of the master.
Mm-hmm. Very good point. How about you, Lolly?
Wow. Well, LD kind of stole the thunder there. That was very impressive.
Thank you.
I was originally going to say, to an extent, I do agree with him. I think the terms can be a little bit subjective, but LD really nailed it on the head. It's not so much the terms that are subjective, it's how everything else functions around that. You know, the finer details of the relationship. I really don't have anything else to say beyond that. LB, well done.
How about you, Red?
I'm trying to remember the golden rule. I'm trying to be a good girl.
Go Red.
Yeah, no, let's not encourage Red, okay? Red
no, I'm saying go.
Right now.
I'm saying go. I'm cheering you on to be good.
Oh, okay. I'm like, yeah, let's not encourage Red to do what she does best, which is brutal honesty. For me, that statement kind of raises my hackles, and I kind of want to snarl and bare my teeth at that, because for me, I am a submissive. I am submissive to one. But I will also turn around and bite the hand that pets me, because there's a certain point where my submissive line stops and my alpha comes back out, and it's like, no, you're not going to tell me I have to wear this or that. But for the love and the lust part, that is the dynamic. Whether or not you are sexual partners or not, play partners, things like that, that's that dynamic. It's not, LB said it correctly, it's the dynamic. It's not the person. Because believe me, I'm in lust with a lot of people. I'm not going to call them submissive.
Well, I think he was using that as an example. I don't think he was equating slavery and submission with love and lust. I think he was trying to draw an analogy of the intensity of it, maybe, or the emotional intensity. We're still working our way through the interview here, and as you can see, even when I'm doing the interview, I'm still trying to make sure that I have a good idea of what he's trying to say. Have a listen to how it went from here. This is something that I talk a lot about with a lot of people, and that is, you're right that it's just a label, but don't you think there's some utility in using a label that everyone else kind of has the same idea of what that label means? For example, most people would say that a slave is someone who at least likes to maintain the illusion of having non-consent. In other words, they are bound and owned by somebody, and they really don't have any choice. Well, you and I both know they have a choice, but they like that illusion of not having a choice. So in their minds, the difference between a submissive and a slave is a submissive serves her dominant or master, and a slave does so but maintains an illusion of non-consent. Now that's what I would say 90% of the people in the lifestyle understand the difference to mean. So how does that work with you when you have a slightly different definition, and does that cause you any problems?
It hasn't caused me any problems, but I can see where it might. But most people that meet me and my girl, they pick up on, like I said, how we act and how we project ourselves. Like you said, the illusion of non-consent. You really can't give up your, how would I say,
your consent.
Really be non-consensual. It's always consensual, at least if doing things correctly. Because non-consensual is illegal, of course.
Sure.
But when you're dealing with people that come up to me and introduce themselves as slaves, they want to be. They want to be like a doormat type person where they don't have any choice. What they think, what they wear, what they say, what they do. They have to have permission to do anything. If they want to speak, they have to have permission. If they want to sit down, they have to have permission. If they want to sit on the furniture, they have to have permission. I don't really go that far. My wife is my sub and has been my sub. We've started out from day one in this lifestyle. I was in it before her. I introduced her into it because she has a very submissive personality. I have a very alpha male personality. And we just really clicked together from day one. And I knew that I would want to spend the rest of my life with her. Because not only are we in this lifestyle, yes, we are married. And yes, we are soulmates. So I have the best of all the worlds. I have a best friend, I have a soulmate, I have a confidant, but I also have one that believes in the same things that I do when it comes to the lifestyle.
Okay, so this is the part of the interview where I start to realize that the pack of wild subbies was going to attack him and rip him to shreds when we actually got to the show. And I didn't really make that real clear to him in the middle of the interview, but I did tell him after the interview that he was going to be raising the tackle. And so, LB, I'm going to give you first shot at this.
Okay. First of all, I think he speaks very highly of his wife, his girl, his submissive. So that's nice to hear. But first, I don't think that anyone wants to be a doormat, and I certainly don't equate someone who is a slave who chooses to hand over complete control to their master makes them a doormat in any way. So that's really the only thing that I have to say about that.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Lolly?
A couple things to say about this, actually. I definitely agree with LB on everything she said about the doormat. As somebody who has lived my life as a slave for the better part of a decade, it really annoys me when people refer to us as doormats, because that implies that we can't think for ourselves at all, and that's just rude, to be completely honest. We're not doormats. We just prefer to have somebody else at the helm. You wouldn't call a soldier in a war a doormat necessarily. They're still doing their job, but they're run by their general. That's just how it works. As far as his description of the slave lifestyle, it sounds like he's describing high protocol, which is certainly a dynamic that you can run with slavery, but it's not everybody's. And for those of you who don't know what high protocol is, it's essentially rules that are set in place that you always have to follow. Like when you enter the room and your master is there, you have to kneel on the floor, just as a dramatic example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's a whole lot easier to do if you are heavily involved in the online BDSM culture. It's a lot harder to do in real life than people think.
Don't I know it?
How about you, Red?
All right, brutal honesty's coming because little Red just can't keep her mouth shut. That completely offended me.
Really?
The couple that we both know very well is an actual 24/7 master and slave couple. Mm-hmm. He makes all the decisions, but she is not a doormat when it comes to it. I mean, she takes care of what she needs to take care of within the confines of the list he gives her and things like that. And that, to me, is... I'm biting my lip. I'm being a good girl.
Actually, I will later on in the interview. I come back to this topic and I tell you a little bit about what I think on this. But so far we're tracking, though, I think, and I'm really proud of you girls. You guys are really being nice. So I'm very proud.
Well, you told us to.
All right, so now we're going to go. Normally we would go to a musical break by now, but this is some good stuff, and I want to just keep on going. We're going to skip the musical break, so if either of you has to run and go pee or something, just go do it. Just don't tell us. All right, so let's go on with the next section here. Do you define your partner as a slave then?
No, I define her as my sub, because I really can't say she would be my slave because we don't. Like I said, to me, that's on a different level than what we're at.
But in the beginning of the interview, you mentioned that for you the definitions were slave was like love and sub was like lust. Is that right?
Right. No, that's exactly right. But because, like I said, I've been with my wife for 20 years. I still get butterflies when we go out on a date.
Sure. So you obviously love her.
We're still lusting after her.
Sure, yes. But you have love as well,
definitely,
right?
Definite.
And why are you hesitant to call her your slave?
Well, because, like I said, I the way the slave is to me is like she doesn't have to ask permission of me to sit on the furniture. She doesn't have to ask permission for me to speak.
Sure, but that's kind of other people's definitions, not yours necessarily, though. You see, this is kind of where it goes back to what I talk about, which is if you use a definition that everyone else doesn't, there's this miscommunication, because the way you defined it to me was, well, if you really love somebody, then they're kind of your slave. But on the other hand, that's not everyone else's definition. And now when I was asking, well, why don't you consider her your slave, you used other people's definition, which is getting permission to sit on the furniture. You see where I'm going with this?
Right. I guess it would be miscommunication. To me, it's a normal thing. I really don't. Mm-hmm. As for labels, I guess she would be a slave, but just we have a unique situation where she's a submissive slave. It's kind of hard now that you brought it up and start thinking about the labels.
Am I blowing your mind, Bobby?
I've never,
never given it that much thought.
That's something really hard to think about.
Yeah, well, that's what we do on this show, and that's what I do. I make people think about these things.
Very good at it.
Now, to be fair, a slave is a subcategory of submissive. All right? I mean, I think we can all agree on that, can we not? Ladies?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. All right. And so, it's kind of, I can understand how people can get a little confused because all slaves are subs, but not all subs are slaves. I just want to make that clear for the people listening tonight. So what do you got to say about what he just said there, LB?
Well, my brain's kind of melting right now. This is the part that really confused me because, you pretty much addressed everything that I would say in that he at first said that there was no blanket definition or something along those lines and that they're just labels, but yet he used a blanket definition to justify why his wife wasn't a slave because she doesn't ask for permission to do these high protocols like Lolly explained. So, and again, the whole love-lust thing just further complicates. I don't understand how that's even relevant. I mean, I think love is relevant and everything, but submissive. What is submissive slave? I'm confused.
Lolly?
Okay, so as a scientist, this section really offended me. All I kept thinking throughout the entire thing was nomenclature. If you can't categorize things, how do you know what's happening? I mean, our perspective is based entirely around our ability to categorize things. And categorizing somebody as a submissive or a slave is a very, very, very important step of this. I mean, the way you interact with one is going to be entirely different from the other. So, not to rant, but I had to get that out.
From now on, when I introduce you on the show, it's going to be professional fetish model, rope bunny, and scientist. I like
Computer scientist.
Oh, whatever. All right, Red, your turn.
Do we really want to give Red the opportunity to do this?
I'm just picturing you with your hair on fire right now, Red. You know why I save you for third in rotation on these questions. See, I'm hoping the other girls kind of take some of that steam out of you so that you don't actually kill somebody.
I would not actually kill anybody. I'm sitting here hanging my head going, oh God, oh God, oh God, and not the good way. Okay, be nice. Be nice. This for me was, again, offensive because this is your dynamic. As a master, you, in my opinion, you need to be very clear and concise in roles, definitions, terms, and understanding of the dynamic. So for him not to be able to say, yes, she's my sub, or yes, she's my slave, or she's a switch, or, she's a masochist, to give her a defined role in their dynamic is very disheartening for me. Because for me, if you're not consistent and you're not on, how do I put this without being offensive?
Clarity is important in these things. I think we're.
Thank you.
Yes.
If you're not clear and defined in your purpose, then why am I going to kneel for you?
Right.
As a submissive?
Now,
why am I going to follow your orders?
Red, it's interesting that you mentioned the word roles because we went even deeper into this, and it kind of touched on the subject of roles within the submissive or slave master dynamic. Have a listen. Let me ask you this. When you are active in the local community, I assume, here, or at least from our talks before, when you meet people in the community at a local munch and they introduce themselves as either a submissive or a slave, what are the things you think about right then and there? I mean, what are the assumptions that you make about that person? When somebody says, I'm a slave, even an unowned slave, but I am a slave, what are the assumptions that you make about that person? First of all, do you believe that someone can be an unowned slave? Let me ask you that one first.
An unowned slave. I I guess they could be, because they could be, even though they're unowned, they can still service others.
So you believe it has a lot to do with what they are doing, because you use the word service, which is something that you do, and I tend to think in terms of who you are versus what you do. And this is the point that I make in my book, in fact, throughout the whole book, that DS is who you are, how you think, how you relate, the relationship dynamic, and BDSM is what you do. In other words, something like service, or asking to sit on the furniture, or walking around with a chain around your neck. Those are things that you do. However, the DS portion is kind of your mindset, your way of expressing your love, for example. And in that regard, maybe you and I think along the same lines, because when we were thinking of the differences between slaves and subs, you naturally thought of slaves as something more intense, more deep, more of a relationship dynamic, I think, versus the submission, which I'm not sure I agree with. But I think that's kind of where you went with this. When you said a slave, you immediately thought of service, which is something that you do. Do you think being a slave is something that you are, or something that you do?
Well, it's a double-edged sword, because in slavery, I would think it's more of a service-oriented type thing. Feel that that's what makes you happy, being of service to somebody. Whether I can see where DNS is more the emotional side, and BDSM being the physical aspects of it, going from either simple service as in serving somebody at a tea service, or serving somebody at a dinner service, bootblacking, things like that. So to me, I guess slave would be more of a service-oriented type person, and then the sub would be just being submissive, where you're giving your control to somebody, and you're emotionally. I guess that's how I would have to.
That's also kind of interesting. Yeah, I find that also kind of interesting, because most submissives out there who consider themselves service-oriented consider themselves submissives rather than slaves, interestingly enough. In fact, the most common term for that is a service submissive. You never hear anyone call themselves a service slave, which, again, is kind of interesting the way you have a slightly different view than a lot of people. All right, LB, you're up. What do you think?
Okay, well, he mentioned he equates being a slave with service, and I agree with that. I don't think that anyone who is a slave would not be service-oriented, but he said something that kind of caught my attention, specifically that being a sub is more of just giving control to somebody. But,
yeah, he did.
And that's true, but only slaves do the same thing, just on a more intense scale. So I'm not really sure that he's clearly making the distinction there.
How about you, Lolly?
In order to respond to this, I'm going to take an example from a friend of mine. Her name is Emma. She's on FetLife as Jake's Kajara, and she's very, very prevalent in a lot of forums for master-slave. And she's really not super service-oriented. She's a stay-at-home mom, and she definitely takes care of the house, but it's not so much of a, making sure the shoes are in the right spot and the socks are folded on the bed before work kind of thing. And she's feisty. She's very feisty. And she's intelligent and takes care of everything, whereas her husband and master cooks and cleans and takes care of their animals and does all the things that you might think of as service-oriented, quote-unquote. So using this as an example, I really don't agree that somebody is a slave just because they're service-oriented. Like you said, you can be a service-oriented sub. So what's stopping you from being a not service-oriented slave?
Absolutely. How about you, Ray?
Well, I've rolled out of steam on that one because the rule of be nice. I
can just imagine like blood spurting out of Red's eyes right now. But go on, Red.
I serve my sir. I help. Granted, he is fully capable of taking care of all of his own stuff, but I help take care of the house and help do laundry, and I also maintain my own home because we do live in two separate households, so I run my house, and I help him where I can in his. And he doesn't tell me, hey, you need to do the laundry for me. I'm like, hey, there needs laundry done. Okay, I'll take that and go take care of that real quick while I'm busy doing something else. But not all slaves are, like Wally said, service-orientated. They may just like the power exchange of not having to be the one to make every single decision down to the minute detail. And that's okay. And I know plenty of subs that are that way. They don't want to make all the decisions, so they allow that power to go to someone else.
Well,
because you can't take it.
This was the point that I made, was that almost in every instance when you talk to someone who is service-oriented, it's almost always classifying themselves as a service sub. I have never, in fact, in my entire life in this lifestyle, and I have lived my entire life in the lifestyle, I've never had a vanilla relationship. That's how much I've been in the lifestyle. I've never heard anyone call himself a service slave. So I find this very interesting. I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm just saying this is, this kind of goes back to my pet peeve, which is, you can use whatever terminology you want, but it makes it kind of hard for you later to complain that somebody isn't understanding you or and your life and how you're trying to portray yourself. Let's go on to the next clip here, and this is
before we go on. Sorry to interrupt, but I gotta get out of here. Thank you very much for having me on the show again.
We're so glad you were here tonight. We hope you're going to be back every week now, right?
Oh yeah. I'll definitely work for it, just for you.
All right.
Yay! We have another one.
Thanks for being here.
We can outnumber you. Oh, sorry, my brat came out.
Sometimes I got to get some DOMs on here because the estrogen is just overwhelming sometimes.
Well, not only that, you have 3 different kinds of submissive.
Well, yeah. We need a couple of different kinds of dominance on this show to balance you guys out. And we need some sane people to balance out the redheads. All right, let's go on with the next clip here. And this is how Master Bobby's wife classifies herself. How does your submissive, I'm assuming we're talking about your wife, how does your submissive define herself? What kind of submissive does she think she is?
I wouldn't really know. I can just tell you that she is, personality-wise, she is very submissive in regards that, oh, wow.
I don't ask ED questions in this show, Bubby.
Yeah, there's no fluff. That's a really good question.
Maybe this is a question we can come back to in another show if you want to. I'll let you think about it. Maybe you even talk it over with her, and maybe we'll get her on sometime.
That's a good idea.
All right, LB, what do you think?
I think it's a little concerning that he doesn't know what kind of submissive his wife is. That's really all I have to say. I think that if they've been together for 20 years, he would be able to clearly define that role that she plays in the house. Like Red said earlier, that those roles need to be clearly defined, and it's a little worrisome that he can't do that.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Red? What do you think?
And this is where Red takes the carcass clean and licks her chops. In the course of Little Red being Little Red, I did do some research. I did look them both up on set. She classifies herself as a switch on set. But she also has a slave registry number in which on the profile it states slave. So, in that, I'm slightly confused for her and for him because that's unique in my opinion.
Unique. I like your choice of words there.
You said be nice, and the FCC would not be happy with me if I said exactly what I wanted to say.
So, in other, you're concerned that he's concerned, or she is, about clearly defined roles in their DS relationship. Have I got that right?
I'm concerned for them for the simple fact that it seems that it's a very insulated relationship. that it's their world kind of thing, and they're not as active in the community, I guess.
Well, that's not necessarily
interacting with.
He's not here to defend himself. So I'm gonna jump in here and defend him.
I know.
You can be very active in the community without projecting your ideas about the way relationships are supposed to go or how they go in your life. And I mean, it's very rare that you interact with people on that level. I mean, I interact with people in the local community all the time, but you know me, Red. I don't tell people how their relationships ought to be. I don't try to categorize them. I don't, I rarely even have discussions on this level because it's really none of my business. What they do is their business. If it works for them, more power to them. I think the only concern that I have is when you start interacting with people and, people when you tell somebody about yourself, it's because you want them to understand you. I mean, that is probably the most basic human need that we have, is the need to be understood. And so you meet somebody, you introduce yourself, you shake their hand, you say, hey, I'm a dominant, or I'm a switch, or I'm a slave, or I'm a submissive. And you throw that out there hoping that they will understand a little bit more about you than they did 5 minutes ago. But if your definition of that word and their definition of that word mean two completely different things, that's not accomplishing what you had hoped to accomplish in that conversation. And so this is an ongoing concern of mine. But it's not to say anybody's right or wrong. It's just sometimes it can be a situation that just muddies the water, and I don't think it serves anybody's purpose to do that. But we'll just drive on. And this is where it gets kind of interesting. I was talking to him. I'm trying to clarify and trying to get a little deeper into where he's going with this conversation. Have a listen to this. Got another question for you. Are you poly, first of all? Let me ask you that.
No.
No. Okay, so you're monogamous, dominant, with a lifelong partner who's a submissive. Tell me why you call yourself Master Bobby, because most people, and I do this too, but most people consider it either a master-slave relationship or a dom-sub relationship, but you obviously have a master-sub relationship, and those are the types that I tend to prefer as well. But tell me why you prefer it and why that became the standard in your relationship.
Well, actually, it was from a previous relationship that I had. With my previous, I just started with her. She had other relationships where she was a slave to them, and she just, I guess with my personality, my alpha male personality, she picked up on it, and she felt that I guess I could replace or be the master that she wanted. But again, hers was a different, we didn't connect emotionally. Sure. For her, it was more of a physical, let me service you type deal, and that just really wasn't what I was looking for, and we just didn't connect until I met my wife now. And for us, it's more of an emotional thing than service.
LB?
Okay, so again, he's saying that he didn't want the service aspect or service type relationship, which you say most dominant submissive type relationships are service oriented. So he wanted to find someone he was more emotionally connected to. I guess I don't really understand how that affects his title necessarily. So again, confused.
Yeah, I was a little too. What do you think, Red?
It was painful for Red. Are you loving this? Are you loving the pain?
Loving it.
No, I am not loving bleeding through biting my lips.
It's times
not
like
okay.
It's times like this that I think that I just might be a sadist.
Oh, I know you're a sadist.
I could have told you that a long time ago. I think I did tell you that a long time ago.
For me, that was an entirely confusing and utterly murky bit of the conversation, because in one aspect he says, it came from a previous relationship. Well, if that relationship is over, then, that dynamic is no longer there. And so you would reevaluate for your current situation, because for me, I don't think I could ever call a man master. That aspect, because that to me is giving everything over to them.
Mm-hmm.
All of me, every decision I can possibly make, every movement I can make, everything to them. And at that point, you are my master.
So in your mind, doing that makes you property, right?
Very much so.
Mm-hmm. And also there, you've almost agreed with him. Do you realize? Because you just classified the master-slave dynamic as being more emotionally intense than a dom-sub dynamic. So you do have something in common with him.
I can see it that way, but that's not how he describes his relationship, though. And that's that's where I'm having this problem, is because it's one way here, one way there, but the commonality in it is not there.
Right, because he did describe his current relationship as being more intense, more emotionally invested than his previous one.
Yes.
So I'm not sure that it's consistent, but let's go on to the next clip then, because this gets a little bit more interesting, I think, as we go through this. I just want to make sure that I'm not skipping here. I don't want to miss anything. Let's try this one. I think this is the one. Okay, so now going back to the question I was headed for, which is, somebody introduces themselves as an unowned slave. What do you think they're trying to convey to you?
Well, going from my previous relationship, they just want the physical aspect of what I would consider the BDSM lifestyle. They don't want the emotional attachment.
Really? That's what you would take away from that?
Yeah, because, like I said, to me, slavery is more the physical aspect of it. But being unowned, I can't see them. Maybe they don't want any kind of like a home-based type lifestyle to it. And like I said, this is just from my perspective, because
everyone
I don't have a household. I don't have a group of people servicing me. I don't go out there looking for people to service me. I'm happy where I'm at. I have the relationship that I have with my wife. We grew together in this relationship into the lifestyle. I learned what it was to have that emotional aspect in the lifestyle. Because to me, beforehand, it was, again, just a physical thing. She wanted me to tie her down. She wanted to worship my feet. She wanted me to do these things with her, and I'd go through the motions, but there wasn't no feeling to it.
Okay, so in this segment of the interview, he characterizes the master-slave relationship as emotionless. What do you think about that, LB?
I think that there are a number of things wrong with this. I think that personally, I feel that he's he's speaking from a past experience, and not a very positive past experience.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that slavery has anything to do with just the BDSM aspect of it. And again, he's trying to equate slavery with no emotional attachment, and I just don't think that that's true. I think that again, it has to do with how much control you're willing to hand over to someone else. And if there's no emotional attachment, I don't know, it's a little concerning to me, because I think of BDSM as, I look at it on a spectrum, basically. And so it's, again, the amount of control you're willing to or you need to give up. And so if we're going from least control to most control, if we start on the far right, we have the top-bottom dynamic. And to me, that's the BDSM part of things. Maybe I'm wrong. Y'all can shoot me up and spit me out if you want to, but the top is the person who's swinging the flogger. There's still a power exchange, but it's temporary, and it's limited to just play. And then we have the dom-sub relationship, and this is where the distinction occurs to me, and it gets into DS territory. There's more control from the dom, but the sub still has rights. He or she is allowed to negotiate, and the sub has limits that are respected. And then we get into a master-slave, and the slave consensually gives up her rights and allows her master to decide her responsibilities and limits for her. And then last, there's owner property. And I see with each progression, there's a greater shift of power to the dom, the master, the owner. I don't see it as having anything to. I just can't equate slavery with just BDSM. I don't know.
Right. One of the things that I point out quite often is that power. There is a power exchange, but it can be an unequal or a it doesn't have to be an even power exchange. So, and you're right. I think that the spectrum is how much more power is handed over as you go further and further towards from the submissive end of that spectrum to the slave end of the spectrum. What do you think, Red?
I'm like bouncing in my chair because I'm so proud of you, LB. That is so awesome. That was just fantastic.
Profound.
Deeply. But to add to that, the top and the bottom in a scene, there's still a level of caring because that top is still responsible for the bottom. So there's still a level there going all the way to the end of her spectrum, which was the owner property. For the most part, that is like the most profound connection because that person is tied to you in every single fiber. Every decision is wrapped around that dynamic. Granted, some of it can be odd and some of it can be detached. Property can be loaned out, things like that, but so can submissives and slaves. But that depends, again, on your dynamic. But that property, every fiber of your being is attached with them because if that shatters, it is devastating.
It is. And, this is not a concept that is unique to the BDSM and DS lifestyles. I mean, there are millions and millions and millions of vanilla people out there who will say to their spouse or to their girlfriend or boyfriend or whoever, I'm yours. You belong to me, or whatever. I mean, this is not a foreign concept. The idea that you give yourself fully to your partner is not necessarily kinky. It is just an expression of very devoted love, don't you think? I mean, I don't know. I mean,
I would hope so.
Yeah,
I would hope that. But ours goes, in my opinion at least, a little bit deeper than that, with the, collaring and branding, and, it goes a little deeper, much like a wedding ring, but as we see in everyday life, divorces happen and they're devastating.
Mm-hmm. Well, no,
but in ours, we're so attached, it becomes that much more painful. Sure.
Now, he goes on to try to clarify this whole idea that it depends on the intensity of emotion. Have a listen.
To us, it's a very emotional thing, and that's just the way that I see it.
So let's recap, and let me make sure I have an understanding of your understanding of this. You separate submissives and slaves on the basis of the intensity of the relationship. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Okay, and you consider yourself a master, but you have a submissive. Am I still on track here?
Yes.
Okay, and she obviously considers herself a submissive as well and not a slave. Would she ever consider herself a slave in any way?
She may. Like I said, that's actually we've never really discussed that. When I introduce her to other people, I don't introduce her as my slave.
Okay, and you brought up a little earlier, Red, that she lists herself as a slave in the International Slave Registry. Is that right?
The slave registry number, the SLRN, yes. And it is on her FET profile.
So that's interesting. LB, what do you think of what he just had to say there?
I don't know how much more I can add, but again, he equates the. Well, let me say this. I think that he's right that there is an increasing level of intensity when you're shifting from dominant submissive to master slave, but I don't think that it's. I mean, I think that there can be an intense emotional level there with a submissive, just as with a slave. I mean, vanilla relationships can be emotionally intensive. I do think that it tends to be more emotionally intensive, or it can be for people in a master-slave relationship because of the level of trust that's required, and handing over that level of power to someone. So it can be more emotionally intense, but just I think the way he's stating it is still a little confusing.
Yeah. Did you have something to add, Red?
She pretty much nailed it. What will be?
All right, then we'll just go on to the next clip then. And
Do I
this
get a
kind
lollipop?
Yeah. That just totally destroyed my complete train of thought there, LB. I'm sorry. What was I going to say there? Okay, you drew a spectrum between submissive, slave, and property. Red's just loving this, and
you're flabbergasted. Absolutely.
And my mind kind of went that way too. I asked him about the whole property thing. Have a listen. Do you consider her to be your property? That shouldn't be a hard question.
Well, it's a double-edged sword. I would say in a public play, in a public lifestyle event. Yes.
Okay, so again, now you're classifying it as an outward label that doesn't necessarily apply to the way you think. So in other words, you're saying you don't consider her your property. She probably doesn't consider herself your property, but you might introduce her to others at an event that way. Am I tracking?
Well, just so that people understand that, I guess we try to fit into other people's labels because we've been in situations where somebody thinks that just because we're at a lifestyle event where other people are poly, that we are. I've had people not understand boundaries.
Sure, but that happens in every walk of life, not just ours. And in fact, there are probably more poly people in the BDSM lifestyle, but it's not the majority by any means. It's a very small minority in the BDSM lifestyle. But that's a topic for another show. Okay, so this is where he started to blow my mind, I think. What do you think, LB?
Again, he's not sure. He doesn't seem to be clear on their roles, and he wasn't sure what kind of submissive his wife was, and didn't seem sure as to whether or not she was considered his property. And my understanding is some submissives will refer to themselves as property to their dominant, and so I'm not sure if he's just hesitant to be out or open about whether or not he considers his wife as property. He just sounds like he's very confused and doesn't really understand how to clarify his relationship with his wife.
Well, sometimes you are so deeply involved in the relationship that you never really stop and take time to think about it and put labels on it and to define it, and very rarely are we required to explain it to other people. And so it's real easy to kind of get in. So he's not here to defend himself. I'm going to defend him. Sometimes you don't really think about these things while you're in the middle of them. I mean, think about the times that you fall head over heels in love with somebody. You don't try to explain it in rational terms so that other people will understand it. You're just wallowing in the emotion and the feeling and the the giddiness and whatever. And when you try to explain it to somebody else, it comes out all completely irrational, and it happens. What do you think, Red?
I see your point. I see LB's point, but again, very, very muddy, murky explanations to say we go out in public, and if we're in a public play area, she is my property, and that's how it's seen, but doesn't define her as property, but doesn't define her as a slave or a sub. Wow.
All right, so we're going to go on to the next clip here, and this is where I kind of make my point about, words do have meaning, and there's a lot of utility in that. The whole question of what other people in the lifestyle think about when they think of subs and slaves, do you think any of that matters?
To them it does.
Why?
Well, because that's their beliefs. I can't, like I said, those terms, I view them as very subjective, because even between me and you, what you would classify as a slave is probably different from what I would classify as a slave. So being such subjective terms, I guess as a whole, that the lifestyle should come up with definitions that fit for everybody. But
I sometimes I agree with that, and sometimes I'm not sure I do. I mean, at a certain point, you run the risk of there being definition Nazis running around telling you that your words don't count because they don't fit the official definition. But on the other hand, there's a great deal of utility to be gained from ensuring that the person you're talking to understands what you mean when you say my wife is my slave or my wife is my submissive. You tell people these things because you're trying to convey something to them. You want them to understand what your relationship dynamic is, but if their understanding of that word is completely different than your understanding of that word, then that's an epic fail. In fact, I was going to say that at the beginning of the interview, that when you used the word doormat, I said, yeah, you're going to start getting some hate mail real quick on that, because that is a term that is a hot button for a lot of people. There are a lot of militant submissives out there who are saying, I'm a submissive, but I'm not a damn doormat, and don't ever call me that. And they'll get up in your face over that. And believe me, I know, because people have gotten up in my face over that, even though I do not use the word, and I don't subscribe to the notion that anybody should be a doormat. And in fact, I've had people tell me I could never be a submissive because I don't want to be a doormat. I said, well, that's great. I don't want you to be a doormat. Nobody should be a doormat. In my view, a doormat is somebody with no opinions, no backbone, no integrity, no ethics, no free will, none of that stuff. It's just somebody who is stealing oxygen. So it's good to have the same understanding of what a word means, I think. And of course, this is one of the reasons I wrote my book. So what do you got to say about that, LB?
Well, first of all, I think that it is important to have blanket definition, like you said, so that people can identify, first of all, not only who they are, but other people can identify their role. Like you said, people like to be understood. And I think that the community does tend to have sort of widely accepted or universally accepted definitions for these things. Otherwise, people would run around and call themselves whatever. There wouldn't be any sort of understanding of what we're talking about. And also, I think I struggled with this, or I still struggle with identifying with my title. And, a couple of people had kind of jumped in and said, you're too wrapped up in the title, and you should just be having fun and learning and growing, and which is what I'm doing. But I think it's really important for people to have a title that fits with them, because it's a way of knowing who you are and what your role is. And I don't know, I just think that's important.
Yeah, I do too. What's one of the most satisfying things for me in what I do, and I'm just beginning to think of myself as an educator in this field. I've always been in the lifestyle, and I've always mentored people, and I've always taught people, and I've trained people, and I've done this all my life. It's just been something that I did. I never really thought of it as a calling or anything like that. And it's only since writing the book that I'm actually being looked at by a lot of people in kind of an official capacity as some sort of a BDSM lifestyle educator. But one of the most satisfying things that I get out of that is when somebody reads my book, or I have a talk with them, and we discuss some of these topics, and this light bulb goes off in their head, and they go, that's what I am. And you can see their eyes light up, and you can see, they literally grow 2 inches right in front of you, because suddenly they understand who they are and what they are and why, and that there are other people out there. And it's a really cool thing. So on one hand, it's real easy to just dismiss the labels and say, well, they're just labels, they're just words, they can mean anything anybody wants them to. Yeah, but there's something special about suddenly realizing that there's a name for what you are. And it's, and there are other people like you out there. And now that you know who you are and what you are, you can go out there and find those people and compare notes and laugh about the same things. And I think that's really, really cool. And so, I think there's a lot of, good things that can come from having mutually agreed upon understandings of what certain labels mean, even though nobody likes to be labeled. I don't like to be labeled. I wrote the end of my first chapter of my book was all about how I don't like to be labeled. So I understand that. I really do. What do you got to say, Red?
I'm actually good.
Oh my God, I'm writing this in my journal. Red didn't have anything to say.
This is a red letter day. Red actually had no opinion on it.
Well, we kind of wrapped up that interview with this, and then we'll have some more commentary on that, to try and put out some kind of an authoritative vision of what these things mean to most people. And I don't try to tell people what they should mean, but I do put out that, hey, 85% of the people in the lifestyle think it means this, and you're free to use that word to mean something else, but then don't go around whining about why nobody understands you, because you're using a word that everyone believes means something completely different than you. I think it's a big problem. Hey, I really appreciate you calling in, Master Bobby, and we'll have you back on as often as we can.
Oh, thank you, sir. I really enjoyed it, and you even got me thinking.
And so that's how we wrapped up the interview. The actual interview lasted about 35 minutes. I kind of cut it down to about 15 or 16 minutes, and then chopped it up into little bits so that we could address different portions of it this evening. What's your overall impression, LB?
I don't know. My overall impression is, if I were, okay, and so I'm a newbie, but if I were really, really new and didn't know anything, I think that I would be somewhat misguided, and as someone who's not been in the lifestyle very long, I'm again still kind of confused, but think that I can wrap my head around some of this stuff a little bit better than I would have been able to 3 or 4 months ago. But
right. And because of I tell people this all the time, you really contribute something very valuable to the show, which is you're able to look at the lifestyle and the things in the lifestyle through the eyes of somebody who's kind of discovering a lot of it for the first time. You've only been in the lifestyle several months now, and I've never been out of the lifestyle, so I have no frame of reference. And when I look at many of the things in the lifestyle, I just see the world as it is. You see the world as it could be or as it might be, but you see it as through the eyes of somebody who knows what it looks like on the outside. I really don't. So I really appreciate that contribution that you make to the show. I think it's very valuable, because otherwise so much of this is stuff that I just take for granted. And and that's hard to convey to other people. People ask me questions like, well, what attracted you to the lifestyle? Birth? My parents were kinky. My parents were kinky poly swingers, and I grew up as a kid with all 25 of the Planet Gore sex slave novels on the shelves. So I was reading about masters and slaves when I was 8 years old. So I really don't know any other way to be. How about you, Red?
Well,
what do you think?
Ways I envy that.
Well,
from my perspective, because you don't have, when you're in your 40s and you're all of a sudden realizing what you're made of, it presents a lot of tough challenges as well. And when you don't have another frame of reference, in a lot of ways, I envy that too. So, but anyway,
in some ways, I do consider myself lucky, because I've never been conflicted about this. I've just always known who and what I was my whole life. Even as a kid, I was that bossy little kid, even in elementary school, telling the teacher the way she should run the classroom. I really was. And so, it's just a part of who I'm hardwired this way. I can't imagine being any other way. These people who say, oh, you can't be a good dom unless you're a sub first. Well, that's like telling me I can't be a good man unless I'm a woman first. That's bull crap, What do you think, Red?
Oh, you really, ooh. I'm going to shut up now. Okay. Anyway, bypassing that entire last statement, because that will get me in so much trouble, and I'd rather not. It's like LB said, if I was brand spanking new, vanilla, coming in and trying to understand, and this was my first contact, I would be rather confused and, kind of scared, because it's not, it's muddy as all get out. It's not clear and concise like a sub is, this, and, granted, it's not that way for everybody, and that's okay. Your dynamic is your dynamic. But to give them a basis of what is community-wide accepted as far as the communities I've been a part of.
Well, here's what I think. I don't think that couples in this lifestyle have to really give two hoots about what the rest of the community thinks. Okay? I mean, let me just say that up front. I really don't. And I've been in many relationships, DS, very, very, very intense DS relationships, where we just didn't give a crap what anybody else thinks. Okay? And that's fine, as long as you're not out there telling them what they should think, and they're not telling you what you should think. As long as that there's no friction there, it's fine. What's critical, though, is that there has to be internal consistency.
Yes.
Okay? Internal consistency. And what that means is that at least you and your partner or partners understand what this means. They understand what is going on. And so rather than, if your partner considers herself a submissive, but she doesn't know that you consider a submissive to be, this or that, well, there's going to be a disconnect there. Or if, you're called master, not because of anything in your dynamic, but because of what happened in your previous relationship. Well, my previous girlfriend called me master, and therefore my wife calls me master. Well, I'm not sure that exactly makes a whole lot of sense to me. And maybe we're missing something there. I mean, there may be something about that we didn't hear and don't understand, and that's fine. I'm not passing judgment at all here, but there needs to be some kind of consistency throughout, even within your own little sphere, within your own little family grouping or whatever. There's got to be consistency there, and I'm not sure I'm really I'm hearing much of that. But again, I think a lot of this is these are probably just some things that maybe he hasn't thought very, very much about. I'll tell you what I think is the root of this entire discussion, and I'm not even going to call it a problem because I don't think it's a problem in his life. I don't think it's a problem in anyone's life. I think this is just one of those deals where I've asked him some hard questions that he hasn't really thought about before, and maybe he hasn't fully thought out some of the answers. But here's what I think is the root of the discussion, which has got you guys kind of up in arms, and that is I believe that he has never really thought about the differences between the top-bottom dynamic versus the dom-sub dynamic. Okay? And LB, you hit this on the nail about 15 minutes ago when you said that, a lot of what he's talking about probably applies much more to the top-bottom dynamic than anything else. And I agree with you 100%. I think you hit the nail right on the head, because a dominant/submissive dynamic is about emotion. It's about feeling. It's about relating. It's about expressing your love, feeling joy in what you're doing. Okay, it's all about emotion. The top-bottom dynamic is all about technique. It's all about what you're doing. It's temporary, like you said, LV. It's temporary. It's an activity. It's a Saturday night thing. You're swinging that flogger. You're cropping that rear end. You are tying somebody to the furniture. Whatever you're doing, you're serving. Okay, it's service oriented. You're serving tea. You're asking to sit on the furniture. Those are all things you do. You can do any of those things and not give a rat's ass about the person you're doing it for. All right? You don't even have to like that person. All right? If I don't have to like you to ask you if I can sit on the furniture, right? I don't have to like you to let you spank my butt. It's just something you do. Now, for me, and I know you two pretty well, and for all of us here, and for him, I know this is to be the case for him, we like to have it all in one neat little package. We kind of we want our play to be with someone we care for. All right? But it isn't always that way. And in fact, there are a lot of people out there who don't have it that way. There are some people out there who just have that DS dynamic where it's just master-slave, dom-sub, or, king of the castle, housewife, ring around the collar. I mean, that is a DS dynamic, a dominant person and a submissive person. Now, sometimes that submissive person considers themselves a sub, and sometimes they consider themselves a slave, but it's really the same thing. The only difference is a slave is considered to be property, and a slave likes to at least pretend that they don't have free will. Well, they do, but they like that illusion of not having it, and that's fine. That's great. It's very exciting for a lot of people. Sometimes I find it kind of exciting, but it's all about the relationship dynamic, how you feel about it. It has nothing to. You can be a slave and never have sex with the same person. Never have played with them. Never let them, do anything kinky with you. I mean, you can be somebody's slave and never do anything with somebody. Not very common, but it can happen. On the other hand, I know a lot of people. I have been involved with people who are so involved in the play, the munches, the play parties, the dungeon scenes, the demonstrations, the spankings, the bondage, the shibari, and all that. They're so involved in the stuff that you do that it never even occurs to them that you could actually fall in love with one of those people. It's kind of weird sometimes when you see it. I mean, the people who are just so focused on the stuff you do that it kind of goes back to what he's describing. When I recognized it in what he was saying, it's emotionless. They are just going through the motions. They go out Friday night and they get a spanking, they do a whipping, they do some rope play, they do some cupping, they do some fire play. They go home. That's it. There was no emotion there whatsoever, other than the physical pleasure that they get out of those activities. And so I can see how somebody would get that impression and be very, very involved in the lifestyle and go to lots of events and have lots of friends in the lifestyle, because, that's what you see a lot of that. You really do see a lot of that. And you don't see what happens when they go home to the person that they sleep with that night, because that's not something you do in public, right? So it's easy to get that impression that it's emotionless when it really isn't, or at least in my view it shouldn't be, whether you're a slave or a submissive. So I think that's where maybe some of the confusion in his ability to express his understanding of this comes from, is I think he's confusing the top-bottom dynamic for the dom-sub dynamic, relationships versus activities. What do you guys think?
Well, that could be true, but he refers to his wife as his submissive, and then again, he said it's limited in the household. But I guess the confusion lies in him referring to a slave as the love part of it, but then he says he equates the slave with the BDSM stuff, which, like you said, he's confusing the slave with the top-bottom. I see the BDSM as top-bottom, and this is so circular. I can't keep up with it. I just can't keep my mind can't keep up with it. I don't know.
What do you think, Red? I think we lost Red. Well, I think bottom line here is that a lot of people have never really given this any thought. I mean, and there's nothing unusual about that. I mean, think about it. I mean, have you ever really given your relationship with your husband or your wife that much critical thought? Very few people ever do. When you ask the typical vanilla person out there, well, who's in charge in your marriage? And, you get this deer in the headlights look from them. And obviously somebody is in charge, or maybe it's completely, totally balanced, shared responsibility for who's in charge, but they've never even thought of it. I mean, it's a question that just came out of the blue because it's not something people ever really try to analyze and categorize. And Lolly's 100% right. It's very useful sometimes to categorize and label things, because then you can at least, you don't have to reinvent that wheel every time you look at it. Once you label it, you go, okay, I understand this. This is it's a vanilla relationship where the husband is the more dominant personality. Okay, we've put a label on it. Now you don't have to go back and analyze it every single time. You've got a nice little handle on it that you can use to compare to other things sometimes. So.
Well, I think too, like you said, they've been together for so long that there's no need to continually reference their labels. Whether if they're just do parties or munches and they're just he's introducing her as his wife are submissive, there's no need to, unless he's having lengthy conversations about their relationship, there's no need to revisit this and reevaluate it. But still, I think about this stuff all the time, but I'm coming from the perspective of sort of leading the way into the lifestyle with me and my husband. So you can bet that I examine everything. Maybe not a year ago, I could easily describe my relationship and my marriage with my husband, but I can describe it a hell of a lot better now that I am in the lifestyle. But not everyone can do that.
True. And, here's another thing that a lot of people don't really think about is the fact that, when you look up submissive in the dictionary, the definition is an overthinker. I mean, I hate to say it, but y'all overthink everything, okay? And when it comes to dominance, we're kind of like on autopilot. We don't think about it very much. I mean, these are gross generalizations, and I'm sure there's going to be people who say, how can you generalize? How can you make those stereotypical statements? But in general, it's pretty true. Submissives overthink, and doms don't think. I mean, we don't think about these very much, and so we just experienced it. And when somebody asks us, you get the same reaction that we got from Master Bobby, which was, wow, I never really thought about that before. And that's not unusual for most doms anyway. I mean, I do because that's what I do for a living. I think about these things and I try to explain them to other people and in ways that make their lives a little bit easier. So along those lines, it's a pretty good segue, I think. Tell me how you're coming with your books and things.
I'm coming along well. Unfortunately, I made the mistake of starting another one, so I'm bouncing back and forth between Becoming Stone and this other. I've actually started a science fiction. This one is going to be a DS relationship, or it focuses on a DS type relationship, but it's science fiction. So, and I'm not going to market it as a DS or BDSM because I don't think that it's really necessary to do that. But I am chipping away at Becoming Stone here and there, and I really hope to have it published by the end of the year because I have travel plans, and that book's going to be published before I travel.
Absolutely. That way you can write it off as a book tour business expense.
Yeah.
Tax deduction.
Hey, there you go.
See?
There you go.
I keep telling you, we got to go on book tour together. Go out there and
I know.
You can be selling the the fictional side of the lifestyle, and I can be selling the nonfiction side of the lifestyle. So all in one nifty package. So my book's doing good, much better than I had expected. It's only been out about 7 weeks now, and it has been in the top 100 books in the country in 3 different Amazon categories. It is climbing the charts, making a lot of headway in a lot of areas that I didn't think it would be this early on. So I'm very, very I'm pleased with that, and it's getting rave reviews from just about everyone. So, I expected, this is kind of weird, I expected to get eaten alive and crucified as soon as that book came out. Because you and I both know that this lifestyle is full of experts. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, I don't really consider myself an expert. When people ask me, what makes you an expert in this, I say, I'm not an expert in this. If somebody's been married for 50 years, that doesn't necessarily make them an expert in marriage. But they probably have something to offer, don't you think? And so I don't consider myself an expert in this, but I have done this my entire life, longer than most people have been alive, that I know anyway. And I probably have something to offer that you haven't heard before. So check it out. Books on Amazon. Domination Submission, the BDSM Relationship Handbook by Michael Makai. Links are on the website. I think you'll like it. And it's a funny book, too, so I think you'll be surprised by that. I decided I was going to write the first funny. Yeah, the first funny BDSM book. People are kind of surprised by that. And I didn't, in fact, I set out not to be funny to begin with, but it just kept coming out. So I said, screw it, I give up. I'll just go ahead and make it funny. So
it's good. It has a great fun.
I'm glad you're liking it. And for those folks out there listening, go out, read it. I think you'll really, really get something out of it. It makes a great Christmas present, too. Well, we've made it through another show, LB. What do you think?
I think it was a fun one.
Yeah, it was. We didn't even have any musical breaks or anything, and
no.
we hardly stuck our feet in our mouths ever this whole hour. So
you did a great job.
This is the first 90-minute show that we have done. So for those of you listening, you have been listening for an hour and a half, believe it or not. So I appreciate you tuning in. On behalf of me, Mike Makai, and my co-host, LB, and our guests, Lolly and Red, I hope you'll be back next week to listen to Domination and Submission Radio. Take care and have a good evening.